Focus with our topic on criminal law, our unit on criminal law, is we're going to focus on trying to define what a crime is and the types of crimes. We'll look at a variety of different crimes, and really more emphasis will be placed on business-related crimes, in particular, like I said, cybercrime as it relates to a crime. We'll explain the different categories of crime. We will look at the difference between federal and state criminal laws. We will look at what are some defenses to a crime. And then we will look at the differences between crimes against property and crimes against people. So first, let's define crime. Crime is considered any act that is against the public good. And as we discussed when we were discussing our overview of law, it's really basically anything where we as a society think that it's so awful that anybody who does that offense should be prosecuted. The defendant is the person accused of the crime, and then the prosecutor is the government person or body that represents the public at large in the case against the defendant. The plaintiff, if you will, in a criminal action is the party that is accusing the person of the crime, and for purposes of prosecution, the plaintiff is represented by the federal or state governmental person who's acting on behalf of us, the public. So in the criminal proceedings, there's a district attorney, whether it's a U.S. or a state district attorney that's representing us, the people, in our charges against the person who's the defendant, who's accused of committing the crime. The three levels of classification of crimes are felonies, which are major crimes. They have the most severe penalties, including imprisonment and potential for death, the death penalty. Misdemeanors, which are sort of your middle level offenses, less serious. There can still be penalties, including jail time. And then our lowest level are infractions, usually punishable by a fine and not jail time. Sometimes there may be, with our less serious infractions, there might be like some community service involved. So let me just, if you will, have you guys note some types that are in there. So felonies can include things like murder, can include manslaughter, can include, so you might want to write these down. Suggestion, write them down, okay? Murder, manslaughter, felonious assault, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Burglary, arson, yes.
What's the difference between murder and manslaughter?
Okay, we're going to talk about that in the next slide. So good question. Hold your question, okay?
Thank you, Sylvia.
Say what?
Say it again.
Manslaughter.
Oh, murder, manslaughter, arson, rape could be in there, felonious assault.
What does that mean?
I'll talk about that on the next slide too. Felonious, F-E-L-O-N-I-O-U-S. Felonious. Did I say arson? Did I say that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, misdemeanors would include things like driving without a license and causing an accident, leaving the scene of an accident. Believe it or not, public intoxication, disorderly conduct, all of those would be considered to be misdemeanors. Typically speaking, a misdemeanor is going to be a year or less of a jail sentence. They can be at a smaller jail, like a local or county jail, as opposed to a state type of penitentiary. And then lastly, infractions would be things like speeding tickets, staying out after curfew if there was a local curfew, things like that. Good to go?
We don't have a curfew.
Not in Guilderland. Not most of the time we don't. I think there have been times where we have instituted, what's that?
Altamont.
Altamont does? I think Rotterdam does too. I don't, what's that? I don't know. Yeah. I think there have been times where we do institute them. There might be a curfew on Halloween actually in Gilderland. I'm not positive, but there might be. Not to say that people don't get away with it. Okay, so criminal law in the United States. If you remember, going back to our first unit, we talked about there's federal system and state system. Federal criminal law, the policing power within the federal crimes really is limited to the domain that the federal government has criminal protection of, or criminal responsibility for, I should say. So things like our money system, our monetary system, our monetary system is controlled by the federal government. So they're in charge of things like counterfeiting. We also have a law called the Commerce Clause, and that regulates or sets up laws relating to interstate commerce. So things we transact business over state lines, interstate commerce. So the Commerce Clause regulates that. Commerce Clause regulates that. And the policing authorities for the federal government are the two primary ones are the FBI and the DEA. FBI being the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the DEA is the Drug Enforcement Agency. Then most policing power is left to the states. And the states have the right to pass and enforce laws both at a statutory, meaning the legislative bodies, or an administrative agency, like we talked about when we talked about administrative agencies. So there's state-level administrative agencies, and they can set up laws as it relates to their area of authority. And okay. So there are two elements of a crime. In order to have a crime, you must prove these two elements were present. First, the criminal act, and second, the required state of mind. If either of these two elements is not present, there is no crime. So let me explain them in a little bit more detail. The criminal act, also known as actus reus, is called the guilty act. Actus reus is Latin for the guilty act. The criminal act can include conduct that is forbidden, or the failure to perform some act that you're required by law to perform. So, for instance, paying taxes, that's something you're supposed to do. If you don't pay taxes, you violated the law. It's a crime. Failure to report for jury duty. If you don't report for jury duty, it's a crime. Failure to register for the draft. If there's a draft, you've got to register. That would be a crime. In addition, with regard to this, the act must be voluntary. So, for instance, is alcoholism considered to be a crime? No. Okay. Alcoholism is a disease. Okay. Somebody doesn't. It's not like you wake up and you say, I want to be an alcoholic someday. Okay. It's involuntary. It's something that is a disease. However, they can't create a law that says alcoholics are criminals. Okay. However, they can create a law that says you can't drive while you're intoxicated. And if you get behind the wheel of a car and cause an accident, or even just getting behind the wheel of a car while you're intoxicated, you're violating a law. Okay? And that can be prosecuted. Mens rea is to have the evil or guilty mind. It's having the required state of mind of committing a crime. So the person committing a crime must have the required state of mind relative to that crime. And a definition of a crime can be changed based on the criminal state of mind. And I give you as an example here, murder versus manslaughter. Okay? In order for we can all agree that killing somebody else is a bad thing. Okay? We can all agree that it's a bad thing. Okay? Depending upon the state of mind is the degree to which it's the level of crime to which it is. Okay? And manslaughter is a lower level of degree of severity than would be murder. So for instance, with murder, it's the intentional taking of somebody's life, whereas manslaughter is the accidental taking of somebody's life. So, as an example, let's just say, Friday night, you go to a bar, you're hanging out with your friends, and there's another group of people, and they're hanging out. People are getting a little rowdy, getting maybe a little intoxicated. Next thing you know, some guy is hitting on your girlfriend. You're a little bit inebriated, you get mad, and you say, let's step outside, okay? So you guys go outside, you're fighting in the middle of the street, you clock the guy, he falls down, cracks his head open on the pavement, and dies, okay?
The guy's like Mayweather.
All right?
Okay.
Well, it doesn't take much, somebody falls and cracks their head on the pavement, it's not a good thing, okay? So, yes, Jacob.
What if it's like manslaughter, but like you don't have any control over it? Like, what if like you're driving and someone who's suicidal like jumps in front?
Okay, well, that's probably not either. That's probably not a crime. That's probably not a crime at all. That's considered to be an accident, and the other person is really committing the crime technically. Okay, so let's focus on this situation. So in that situation, you guys duke it out, maybe a little inebriated. This is probably more like involuntary manslaughter, which is the accidental taking of somebody's life. You, pardon me?
Like getting in a car crash and
Yes, but that may end up actually being voluntary manslaughter as opposed to involuntary. Okay? So in that particular case, you would have probably more of a manslaughter. Okay? You didn't go to that bar. This is separate. Now you go to the bar. You know your girlfriend's going to be there with this guy, and you want to prove it, and you go there and you want to get in a fight with this guy. You go out in the street, and now you're duking it out. You punch the guy, and he falls, and he hits his head on the ground and dies. Probably in that case, you still might not get murder, unless you were intending there to go there and kill him. You might not get murder. You might still get manslaughter, not involuntary manslaughter. Again, you would get voluntary
How long
manslaughter.
do you go to jail for that? If you go.
Depends on the state. Probably, like it's going to be different. It's going to vary from state to state. I don't know what the difference is between jail time between involuntary, voluntary. Murder, I think, I don't know what the minimum is on murder. So, what'd you say? Yeah, honestly, I don't know. I've never looked it up. You can if you want. I don't know. I just never have. Okay? But you see what I'm saying in terms of the levels of intent in those different situations. Okay, so motive. Does motive play any part in a crime? No, technically it does not. Now, how many of you think that it does, or thought until you saw this slide? How many thought? Don't be ashamed. It's most people think it is. Okay, it does not play any role in proving a crime took place. Only those two elements are required. Why does motive play so? Why does everybody have motive in their mind as something that's so important? Go ahead, John.
Because it's like part of the crime that's not part of life, or I don't know, that's right. I don't know, actually. Maybe
Go with your gut. Go with your
I'm so
gut.
out of it right now. Just skip me.
Anybody want to help John out? John, you're not wrong here, okay? We all think it does because what does motive do? It gives a believable story as to why that person did what they did. And do we like to have a reason? Like when we're trying to put somebody away, maybe we're trying to put somebody away for life, or we're trying to put somebody away for something that we think that they did. We want to have a reason for why they did it, don't we? Like we want to try to logically rationalize this. Like why would this person do this? Is it to make money? Is it because they were, somebody was hitting on his girlfriend? Why? Why would somebody do something they know is wrong? So that's why motive plays such an important piece in the equation. But it's not a requirement. So we have defenses to crimes. The first defense to crime is to prove that one of those things, those two elements, does not exist. So if I'm a defense attorney, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to demonstrate as a defense attorney how my defendant didn't commit the crime, raise some level of reasonable doubt, they weren't there, it wasn't really them, or somebody looked like them, whatever. Or I'm going to demonstrate that they didn't have the intent necessary to have committed the crime. Okay, they didn't have the guilty mind. If I can't do either of those two things, then I can use one of four defenses. The first is the insanity defense. The second is entrapment. The third is self-defense. And the fourth is defense of family. I'm going to try to use one of those four defenses if I can't demonstrate that one of the two elements was not proven. Ben, you with me? Are we good? Okay, so let's go through each one of these defenses. First one, insanity. Basically, our American legal system says that if you don't understand what you're doing, then you can't be having the evil mind to do something wrong. So if you can't be held accountable for actions that you don't understand. We have two definitions for that. The basic definition is that you don't know the difference between right and wrong at the time the crime was committed. The first test that we use or definition that we use in the American legal system is the McNaughton rule, and it's our oldest definition. And it basically says that your mental disease is so serious that you don't know the difference between right and wrong. That's a McNaughton rule. You don't know the difference between right and wrong. The modern definition says that you lack substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality of your actions and make sure that your actions are conducted in conformity with the law. So slight difference there. One focuses on your lacking substantial capacity to perform the right actions. The other one, you don't really know the difference between right and wrong. You should note this, about 2/5 of the states use the McNaughton rule, and 3/5 of the states use the modern rule. So 2/5 use McNaughton, 3/5 use the modern.
What does New York use?
Honestly, I don't know. That's a good question. Google that for me. I don't know. That's a good question. I'm gonna guess modern rule, but I could be wrong. Okay. Then let's look at entrapment. Entrapment is when a regular law-abiding citizen is tricked into committing an action that they would not normally have committed. So this is not your situation where an undercover cop goes in and is, basically working with criminals and investigating a crime, and you've got a whole bunch of criminals doing a whole bunch of bad criminal activity, and the police officer catches them doing it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about your everyday Joe, good citizen person who somehow gets tricked into doing something that's not legal. Yes, Luke.
Can undercover cops do illegal stuff?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that one.
We use the McNaughton rule, but it's modified.
Okay, so New York used a modified McNaughton rule. That's good to know. Okay. Does it say how it's modified?
It said something about the burden of proof on defendant.
Okay. To prove that they didn't know what they didn't understand the right and wrong. Okay. Good. Thank you. All right. And wait, so what was the last question? I got to write it down. What was the last question? My last question. Who had the last question?
My question?
Yeah. Right?
Undercover cops
Oh.
and legal stuff.
I think that's a given.
I'm going to guess yes, but I'm not sure to what extent, you know?
Wait, well, what kind of illegal stuff are you talking about?
I don't know. I'll ask the question.
Not like guilty or like that.
Like drugs or
Yeah.
That's what I was saying, but it's not yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
maybe drugs, that's what it's like.
I would imagine they probably do.
Yes, that was.
I would think. Okay, so next one, self-defense. Self-defense is when a person has good reason to believe they're in danger of bodily harm or death, and they use force to protect themselves. Some elements of that was a big huge case. Yes.
So like, why is it in school you can't defend yourself? Because you get suspended.
Yeah, you get suspended.
Yeah. Well, again, we get to school rules.
Well, why is it different?
Well, I
Yeah.
think it's if someone
Well,
hits
you're
you,
not getting charged with a crime.
Yeah, but you get the same
swings
punishment.
twice, and you
No, you don't.
Yeah, you do. You get suspended.
Oh, you mean you get the same punishment as the person who started the altercation?
Yeah.
can- No, I think it's like if they swing twice first, you get to you can defend yourself.
I don't honestly know the school rule in terms of the punishment, but I thought that if the person, I thought it was that the person who started it got 5 days and the other person got 3. That's what I thought.
Well, that's
Get
still-
anything to this.
Well, because I guess their argument is they don't want, people to fight in school, and they would argue that you should do whatever you can to get away from the situation. If you just, try to avoid the situation, I guess, is what they're looking to have you do. If you think you're going to be in a situation where somebody's going to be attacking you, I guess their recommendation would be, talk to a principal, talk to somebody. Do something to make sure you don't get into that situation. Okay, last one, defense of family members. The last defense is defensive family members, and similar to self-defense, as a person may use force to protect a member of their family who is in jeopardy of physical harm or being killed.
Yeah, without friends.
I think it does extend in most cases to friends, close friends and stuff like that.
Not strangers, because someone
No,
gets attacked.
right? No, because there's somebody that person you're not somebody emotionally attached to.
But still, if you see someone getting shit kicked out,
Yeah.
you want to stop.
Call the
them.
police.
They're not gonna.
They're not gonna be. What if they're gonna be dead by the time the police get there?
I don't think it's like
Then you're just a.
I'm
like,
just yeah.
someone that just stands
It
there.
doesn't. I'm not saying it couldn't extend to that, but I guess that what they're saying is that it may not. So we know that motive doesn't play any part in proving criminal liability. So we'll go past this. Okay, we're gonna just do this real quick. Crimes against people. The next few slides are all the different categories of crimes. We're going to just stop right after crimes against people. Crimes against people, first one, assault and battery. And then battery is the unlawful touching of another person. Can be touching with your own body or some extension of your body, whether it be a knife, a gun, poison can be considered a weapon. And then you have assault, which is attempt to commit battery. So if you point a gun at somebody, that's considered assault. You can have what we call felonious assault or battery, and that's when you would use a weapon. You can just threaten somebody, I'm going to beat you up, that would be assault. You hitting them, that's battery. If you threaten them with a gun or with a knife or something like that, then that's felonious assault and battery. Felonious can also be called aggravated, so you could also write that down there, aggravated battery or assault. Then we have our murder category. Murder is the unlawful killing of another person with malice aforethought. So malice aforethought means evil intent and you thought ahead about it. So first degree is more severe, and it could be any one or more of these elements, with premeditation, meaning thinking about it ahead of time, killing in a cruel way, or committing a felony. So if you go in and you break into somebody's house and you have a gun and you're attempting to rob their house and you threaten them and then your gun goes off and you shoot them, you've got first degree murder. Second degree murder is when if any one of those is not present, you would have second degree murder. If none of the, I should say, I'm phrasing that incorrectly. If none of those first elements is present, then you have second degree murder. And then there's manslaughter, which is the unlawful killing of somebody without malice, without thinking about it, without premeditation. And there's either voluntary or involuntary. In the voluntary situation, you intend to kill that person. You go to the bar, you're intending to kill that guy. You make it well known. Let's go out on the street. We'll fight. I'm going to kill you. I'll kick your butt. Okay? That would be voluntary. Involuntary, it happens as a result of some other event that's taking place. Could be an unlawful event or a reckless event. Under many places, the law today, assault and battery are sort of tied together. They kind of go together. They're not necessarily treated separately. Hate crimes, any crimes using symbols, writings, words, where you're attacking one person based on, or a group of people based on their religion, their nationality, their culture, anything of that sort, their race, their gender. There's also domestic violence, which is any type of physical or mental abuse to members of your own household. And then lastly is kidnapping. And kidnapping is both the unlawful restraint of somebody against their will or the unlawful removal of somebody against their will. Now, there are other crimes against people. We've talked about some of them. Sex offenses. We've talked about like human trafficking and so on and so forth. So there are other ones. I'm going to stop there for your slides for today.